Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this LinkedIn Live with me, Justin York, on the hidden risks in your data ecosystem. And for the next 20-25 minutes, I'm going to go through some of the hidden risks that may exist in your ecosystems, a quick refresh of what we think about when we talk about ecosystems, and some of the impacts that these risks might have. Before I get going, though, could somebody just put into the comments whether or not I am actually live, which will be handy, and whether or not it's you can hear and see, etc. Last week when I did a live, we had a bit of a problem with looping, and it all went a bit, it got frozen. So if that happens again, I shall be recording it, and I'll load the recording up and send you a link to it. So let's get going then. Let me start with a question for you to think about. You don't need to answer it, just to think about. Do you know the risks that are in your ecosystem? And I'm not talking about the obvious risks. I'm not talking about those that are recorded in your risk registers, things that you're really sure might happen, such as a software or hardware failure, or something like network outage, or something along those lines. Things that are obvious and things that are in your risk registers. We're not talking about those things. What we're talking about here is the things that are hidden away. They're sitting quietly in the background. They might be things that we've assumed away or wished away. So it might be that somebody said, oh, I've assumed somebody's dealing with that, or I think somebody's dealing with that. And if we hear anything like that, then we need to check to make sure that there's somebody in the organization called somebody. And if somebody is dealing with those things and you've got somebody called that, then great. But if not, we are just assuming or wishing away those risks. Now, everybody has an ecosystem. There might be different sizes, but the similarity is quite stark. So if you're in a large or major manufacturing organization, for example, you might have big tech stacks, you may have an ERP system, but if you're a one-man band or a smaller organization, that might be stored on your laptop, or it could be on your phone, or you could have it stored in the cloud on an iCloud or a OneDrive or whatever. So we all have ecosystems. And in those ecosystems, the data is going to be flowing. Reports or dashboards are going to be produced. And decisions will be being made based on that data, on that stuff that we have running through our ecosystems. The thing is, if you don't understand your ecosystem and you don't really understand the risks that may exist inside that ecosystem, are you working in a way of control, or are you guessing? If you're in control, then you're in a good place. If it's a guess, then really it's equivalent to holding a wet finger up in the air and seeing which way the wind's blowing to see which side of your finger dries the fastest. But what do we mean by a data ecosystem? Last week I was talking about, do we understand our ecosystem? And there were 6 things that we would go through in order to find out what do we know about our ecosystem. The first thing is, what data do we have? And we're not talking down in table level and a whole load of stuff about I've got 16 tables that contain address or postcode or date of birth. We're talking about fairly big chunks of data. So in that major manufacturing organization, we might have things like HR, finance, production, inventory, warehousing, operations, those type of big sets of data. And then when we recognize what we've got, then we have to think about where it is. And so data is not going to exist in single systems any longer. It may have done 50 years ago, but it doesn't anymore. We're likely to have a warehouse. There could be data lakes, Stuff will be in the cloud. Things will be on your source systems. Things might be in spreadsheets that people are emailing to each other. So where is this data? Where does it exist? And it's important that we understand that. And then we need to know, how does it move around? How does it get from A to B, B to C? How does it get there? Again, in the old days, we used to have interface control documents that used to tell us what data was moving where, and how often it moved and who the points of contact were. Today, you might class those things as data contracts. But it's important that we know what is happening, how it moves, when it moves, and the fact that if it fails, then we know it's failed and we can work out why it's failed. So when we know the what, the where, and the how, we then need to know who and what for. So who is using the data and what are they using it for? Because not all data is equal. Data has different purposes. It's calculated for different reasons. It's created for different purposes. And so we have to make sure that we're using the right data for the right purpose. So when we've found that out, we then have to think about who owns it. Who is the decision maker, or who are the decision makers on those sets of data? Who is deciding who has valid and rightful access to that data? And who is it that says, actually, if we've got an issue, I can apply some resource to that to get that thing resolved? And then the last thing we have to think about is, what is the quality of that data? What is the quality of the data in our ecosystem? The standards will be set, and then we have to make sure that the data stays at that quality, that it's fit for purpose, that it's arriving as and when we expect it to be. Is it consistent? Is it accurate? So we have to think about those things. So if you do understand all those things, you're in a good place, then you're in a strong position. You are perhaps what we would call in control. But if you don't understand those things and you can't answer those questions, then that is when risk starts to build. Now, most risks are not visible. They are risks that are not showing up commonly. Everything is looking absolutely fine. Everything's working, the data's flowing, dashboards are being produced. And then suddenly one day, that isn't the case. Some reason or another, it's just stopped. And so these risks that are happening, these risks that have come up and tripped us up, are the things that we need to be thinking about. And quite a few of these exist with people. And so we have to think about the biggest risks being the ones we don't see, the ones that we have assumed or wished away, or we're assuming somebody is dealing with those things. But more importantly, it's the risks that sit with people. And we have to understand that there is a great amount of risk that sits with individuals inside an organization. The longer they've been there, the bigger the organization, the greater the level of risk that we will have people there that are, in effect, single points of failure. So let's go through a few of these risks. So we've got the Bob risk. I'm calling it Bob. It could be Tom or Fred or Jane or whatever, you insert whatever name you like. This is somebody that's been there a long time. They've seen all the evolutions. They've seen your data ecosystems evolve from a single system into some ERP or multiple platforms that you've got. They've watched the organization expand and the amount of data grow exponentially. And they know where the data moves and how it moves. But a lot of this stuff is not necessarily written down. And so Bob, who's been there for 20 years, is this font of all knowledge. If you want to know something, go and ask Bob. If you can't find the documentation for it, which we'll come on to in a minute, go and ask Bob. Bob will know. Except if Bob isn't there one day because he's on holiday, that's not too bad. Long-term sick, not so great. If they've left the organization completely, then there's a huge amount of knowledge that walks out of the door with Bob. Now, if everybody sort of knows that Bob exists, then great. But sometimes organizations don't even realize that they have a Bob in the first place. And maybe Bob has been shouting from the rooftops, I'm a single point of failure. There's a continuity risk here that we need to have a look at, because if we don't do that, we run the risk that if I'm not here one day, then everything is going to stop. So that's the Bob risk. And the next one is, we thought someone knew about that. So every time you hear somebody say, I think, or we thought, that is not the same as I know or we knew. So what we need to do every time we hear that particular thing, because this is really going back to saying, asking that person called somebody about a risk, think or I thought or we thought, then that is the time to go and check. Go and check it out. Is what's happening, is that actually correct? And if it is correct, great, that's all fine. But document it so that we can get rid of this, we thought somebody was dealing with that. And the next one I'm going to have a look at is, or a quick run through, is the workaround risk. And the workaround risk is one that happens in a great many places. So, and for the best reasons in people's minds. But we have processes for a reason. And the reason we have them is so that we can do things the same way every time. Whatever the business process it is, whatever system process it is that we're talking about, we're doing them because we want to do the same things the same way. So when somebody pops up and says, actually, I've got a better way of doing that, and that saves me 15 seconds. Every time I do this, it saves me 15 seconds. It's great for them, 15 seconds saved. Woohoo, that's brilliant stuff. But they don't document it in many cases. They don't refer back to the process owner and say, I found a better way of doing this, because there might be a very good reason why the process is done a particular way. There might be a good reason why that particular workaround isn't there. And it gets slightly worse when that workaround is communicated amongst a group of people. And maybe it's Bob that created that workaround. But when Bob leaves, then the workaround still exists. But what you might find is that people have forgotten why it was created. What caused us to create a particular workaround? So the workaround risk is quite a serious one, because if something does fail, then you're checking back through your process. Everything looks absolutely fine. The process hasn't failed. That's all great. So unless you ask a particular person a particular question at the right time, then you may not find out about that workaround, and you may not find out what the issue was. So the next one to think about is documentation. The documentation illusion. So years ago, everybody was really hell-bent on documenting everything, which was great, because then you had a source of documentation that you could go back to check something out. These days, of course, things are moving much, much faster. People want instant ROI. People want to have a decision made instantly. People want jobs done much, much faster. And sometimes the documentation doesn't get updated. So what we have potentially is something a number of years old that's sitting on a shelf, and it's gathering dust, metaphorically, but it's of no use to you, because when you go back and check it, you realize it's out of date. And when you look at the thing that's failed, then everything has moved forward so far. I mean, people used to have, I mentioned before about interface control documents. These days, I heard recently somebody said, oh yeah, documentation's in the code. But when you look in there, there's a very high level statement that says this does something, but it doesn't tell you about when it happens. It doesn't tell you, who the contact names are. It doesn't tell you all sorts of interesting stuff. So unless you can read Python in your pipeline, then you're going to have a bit of difficulty working out what the documentation is. So that is the documentation illusion. And the last one is the false confidence risk. Because if we think that we know our ecosystem, and we know the quality of our data, and we know where it is and how it flows and who's using it and what for and all those kind of things. If we think we know that, then whatever comes out in a dashboard or a report, we might just take at face value and say, yep, that's absolutely fine. It seems absolutely perfect. But it might not be, because we might not be using the right data. We may not have got it from the right place. Somebody may have sent it to us that have taken out of a spreadsheet or something along those lines. So that's the false confidence risk. So those 5 things, the vast majority of those are people risks. That's what I said at the beginning. We're thinking about the risks that are with the people. So Bob is a people risk. We thought someone knew, driven by people. Workarounds created by people. Documentation not done by people. And false confidence is people looking at something and saying, yep, I'm happy with that. But of course, that may not be the case. Now, each one of those things has an impact. So the first one to think about is the loss of trust or confidence in the data. And when that happens, what we then start to do is double and triple check things. We don't believe what we're seeing because we don't understand the ecosystem. We don't understand the risks. We just check things over and over. And the next one we think about really is if we don't have trust and confidence, then decision making is likely to be quite a bit slower. And it'll be slower because there's checks going on, because we've got that false confidence. We have people who are looking at things going, I'm not entirely sure that's right. And if it's not right, then it needs to be checked. The worst thing is that if you think it is right, you make a fast decision, then you end up with something that doesn't look so great when it isn't the right decision. The next thing is to think about is wasted effort. So remember I was talking about the workaround risk. I was saying somebody said, oh, I've saved myself 10 or 15 seconds every time I do that, which is fine, except when that data moves through the systems and somebody needs to use it or create a dashboard or create a report or do something, they might find that they are constantly fixing bugs in the data, little tactical fixes that they do most days. And it might take them 10 minutes to fix that 10-second workaround. And that's because people are not taking responsibility to make sure that the data is fit for purpose. It's as accurate as it can be at a given point in time. And so wasted effort is those people that are doing those little fixes, but that's not their day job. So their day job suffers with this amount of time that is lost. And if it's just one person, you might only lose 24, 48 hours a year or something like that, 6 days work, something like that. But if there's 50 people, then all of a sudden you're losing a lot of time and productivity from these people. And so what we do then, if we think about this loss of trust and confidence, the slow decision making, the wasted effort, we're exposing ourselves to more and more risk, because what we do is we create more shortcuts, more workarounds. So the level of risk gets higher and higher. And when those things are happening, what we end up with is poorer outcomes. And the reason we end up with poorer outcomes is because we're not able to make the decisions. We're not confident on what we're doing. And so we might miss the schedules. We might miss the deadlines. And so when those things happen, these things are all avoidable. We don't need to have these things. Now, at this point, somebody might say, well, this is exactly why we need data governance. And they would be right, and they might not be right, because that depends on how it's explained. And so governance is often explained as control and process and extra work. And all of those things could be true, because we want to have control. We want to know that the right people are accessing the data. We want to know that they have the right permissions and reasons to access the data. That is a control. And we want to have the processes. And we want the processes because we want to make sure things are done the same way, so that we can track back and we can find when something hasn't worked. But we also need to make sure that extra work is valid, first point, Because if you don't understand your data ecosystem and it isn't in a good state, there will be extra work, but that work will reduce as we get more control and management of the data. But we also have to remember that data governance in and of itself is not the goal. The goal is clarity, confidence, and ownership of the data. And to get that, what we need to do is to get people to think differently, to act differently, and make decisions differently on the data that they are handling or creating. And so your data ecosystems exist. They may be large, they may be small, but what they will be doing is they will be supporting decisions. They will be driving outcomes. And what we need to do is make sure that we understand the ecosystem. We need to make sure we understand the risks, but we also need to make sure that the people understand those risks and that the people understand their responsibility inside that data ecosystem. So if any of this has resonated with anybody this afternoon, then if you want to have a conversation about it, then please drop me a DM and we can arrange a call, quick 30-minute call, just to have a chat about what we think about your particular ecosystems. And I'll be launching a diagnostic tool, hopefully tomorrow. It's this week, I scheduled it, but there's been a few delays technically. So hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to put out a diagnostic system tool so you can think about your ecosystem. And if you're interested in getting the link to that, then put diagnostic in the comments and I'll make sure you get the link once it has been released. So if there are no questions on anything that I've gone through this afternoon, then the only thing that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much for your attention this afternoon and attendance. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks very much.